Brilliant. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us after a well-deserved coffee break. We are going to have a really exciting session now with two exceptional people from our industry. Please welcome Orla, Insights Consultant at CARMA, and Ed Morley, Managing Partner at Point 600. The topic...
I brought my cheerleaders.
Yay. The topic of this panel is SAAS needs CAAS. AI makes consultation increasingly important. And I'm sure this is something that all of us have either thought about or have had to increasingly challenge ourselves about when it comes to how much AI do we use, and does it threaten in any shape or form what we do as consultants as part of our practices. So a really welcome session for us here at AMEC. Just to kick off the discussion, I guess, for both of you, what do you think is the current relationship between SAAS and communications, and where does consultancy fit in?
I'll go first with that. So, generally speaking, there seems to be a perception of a SaaS tool by comms teams that it's going to be a magical silver bullet solution, and we frequently see from the consultant side we act at Point 600, kind of acts as an intermediary between the comtech and the comms team. We frequently find a pretty disappointed state on the comms side, and that's not necessarily because of anything that the comtech is doing wrong or any of their professional services are doing wrong, but we frequently find that the expertise of the comtech folks ends on the edge of their solution. Of course, Orla and her organization are probably an exception to this. But so yeah, it's a bit of disappointment, and there kind of needs to be a bridge between the two. They almost speak two different languages a lot of the time, and they need interpretation and translation in terms of the comms team speaking comms and the comtech solution oftentimes just speaking comtech. And if you think of them as kind of two disparate circles, it kind of requires the bridging circle to translate between them. Let me just check my notes and check I haven't missed anything. Yeah, I think I'm satisfied with that. I think Orla has a perspective as well.
Yeah, so I think, as you said, there is this kind of expectation sometimes, or kind of wishful thinking, that it is going to be some kind of magic bullet that you just press a button and it gives you everything you could ever possibly need without you having to put the work into it. I think, SaaS can be a really great part of a tech stack that you have, but you have to put the work in. You have to plan it, you have to know how to use it, you have to make sure people have the right skills to be able to use it. And I think that's where the consultation element really comes in, and that human element, making sure that you've got someone who can advise and say, oh no, not this bit over here, that's the one that you need, and that can set things up for you in an optimal way as well. I think, yeah, we often see people who kind of think, oh yeah, I just want an off-the-shelf platform solution, and it inevitably goes quite badly for them because they suddenly realize, oh no, that's just giving me some raw data. It's not actually giving me insights. It's not giving me the help that I need. It's not giving me recommendations. And the people on that side are very often, on the SaaS provider side, they're very often aimed at tech support and kind of, this is how you click through here and build this chart and do this. They're not necessarily skilled to be able to give you the advice on what you should be measuring and how you should be approaching your data and insights.
And so bridging that gap is key to clients getting the best of the service. And do you have, from your own experience, some examples of bridging that gap between SaaS and consultation?
Yes, I think we're increasingly seeing that there is a need for consultation or insights as a service. People are increasingly wanting to just pick up the phone and have someone that they can trust at the other end of it, who is going to be able to sort stuff out for them, whether that's build them a dashboard, pull them some ad hoc data, be able to advise them on how they can approach something if they've got a crisis, if they've got something that's just broken. They want to know how they can actually set their measurement up in a way that's going to be able to get them the information that they need quickly and easily. So we're increasingly finding that, we need to make sure that we are selling things not just as the platform, but we've got all of that kind of support built in, and that it's not just a kind of tech support approach, that it is actually advising them on, no, you don't want to measure this bit, this is the thing that you should be looking at, and really focusing on what their objectives and priorities are.
Yes, echo all of that. Just to zoom out a little bit from that perspective, one of the things as consultants that we help with outside of the ComTech is establishing frameworks and strategies and aligning to business objectives so that the measurement that is done is really impact focused. One of the things that we've seen a need for, and we've been helping a lot with our clients, is operationalizing that framework. And that requires the lens of comms and ComTech. So as an example, we have a client who had just brought in a ComTech tool, and we simultaneously spun up a measurement framework for them, and then while they were getting established on the ComTech tool, we helped to configure the tool to match the framework, which required us bridging not only between the ComTech tool and the people on the ground who'd be using the tool every day, but also between the leadership within the communications team who need to report up to the executive leadership team on how they're performing. And that means that on the upfront, we have to configure the tool to be able to report the right things to executives. And if you don't do that on the upfront, you kind of have a spaghetti situation where you can potentially have to undo a lot of what's already been done. And that can take a lot of time and heartache and effort, and it can be a lot of expenditure and a lot of wasted potential on each side. So yeah, you kind of serve as the bridge between the ComTech tool and then the comms team, but also you stitch together the picture that each part of the comms team has and their own unique needs. And in stitching all of that together, you can create a comprehensive view and a personalized view within the ComTech tool that meets the needs of each one of the constituents within the comms team.
And we can come back to the strategy in a bit, but can you expand a little bit on the risks of not bridging that gap? So what are customers losing in terms of their experience and the value they get from the service, right?
I think there's quite a few things there. I think one of the biggest risks and one of the biggest issues is people think data is black and white. It isn't. There can be an almost infinite number of ways of interpreting data. So you can take something from a SAAS tool, you can put it into AI, you will get different results. I always kind of think of a scene from The West Wing, because it's one of my favorite all-time shows. There's a scene in it where you've got a polling expert and she's talking to one of the political advisors, and he's saying like, oh, our polling numbers are terrible. That means, you know, we need to pull out of this congressional district and stop talking about things, and stop talking about gun control, I think it was in particular. And she said, no, that's not what the data is telling me. The data is telling me is that we need to try harder to tell our story. It doesn't mean that we should stop telling it. It means we actually need to try something different to get the message across. And I always sort of come back to that as an example of how data lies. Data can be interpreted in so many different ways. So if that's the only thing that you're getting, and especially if you don't have an insights, planning, or strategy kind of department internally or specialist, if you're a comms person who isn't necessarily that confident with data literacy, with being able to dive into the numbers and really interpret it, or you just don't have the time to do that, then you're really at risk of vastly misunderstanding what the data tells you. And you know, we've seen so many examples of that. It is really rampant in society these days where data gets misinterpreted. We saw that a lot during the pandemic where, you know, there was really bad communication about data in lots of instances. People suddenly thought that they were experts in things and they were taking numbers to mean something that they didn't. So, you know, we've seen lots of really kind of powerful examples of where that can go quite horribly wrong sometimes.
Yeah, I want to kind of take the perspective of what benefits can be gained if they do invest in it, and I think one of the largest ones is that you maximize the value of your investment in a ComTech tool. Comms teams are being asked to do more these days with less, and so making these tools work in your favor is very, very, very important. And a lot, like I said, is invested. There's the upfront investment of the tech cost itself, and then there's the time and the energy of the team in terms of using the tool and trying to make it work. If it's not configured correctly, if you've not kind of been deliberate about setting it up and being strategic about it and and those types of things, then you can lose out on the value of the investment. But on the plus side, there is an opportunity to extract the maximum value from the tool. And we've seen fairly frequently that the teams will come to us frustrated with a tool, and it's not necessarily the tool and its potential that's the issue, it's the lack of the gap bridging that is. And sometimes teams even go so far as to switch tools and go through an entire RFP process, which can be exhaustive of teams' resources, and sometimes it's completely unnecessary. The other thing, if you invest the time up front, is you can really benefit from getting more rich and actionable insights. I mentioned just before about the executive lens and being able to configure the tool in a way that's going to spit out data that's appropriate for executive audiences. For example, it aligns with the pillars of the business strategy, so you can really report on impact. That makes it a lot easier to communicate a story of impact for the comms team, and that has various different effects. They're able to make more intelligent decisions, but they're also able to communicate with more credibility with the executive leadership team, and building the reputation of comms to be a trusted advisor with the executive team and positioning comms as that trusted advisor is critical, and it's the role that comms deserves to have. And this is one of the things, if you take the time and invest in building that bridge relationship, that's one of the benefits that you can get from it. It's obviously an indirect benefit. It's a long-term piece, and that might sound oversimplified, but it is a potential.
I suppose one of the skill gaps that we're increasingly talking about in the comms sector is around data. Data literacy is the computer literacy of the 21st century. Data visualization as well as part of that. How do you see that gap being a problem, that skill gap being a problem, and how can we as a community and an industry help close that gap?
I'll take the executive angle on this. So going back to the example about executive communications, as in communicating to executives about the impact of comms, one of the things that we found is that there's just a lack of education from a data literacy perspective from the executive leadership team about comms data. They might know operational data, they might know financial data extremely well, but comms data is something new and something very different, and that's why the work that AMEC does is so important, and why, you know, so many of us here are here, is because we're trying to solve for this really unique problem or issue. And so basically being able to educate the report recipients, in many cases executives, and educating them on what the metrics are, why they matter, and how they fit into the bigger context is a really important investment to make, number one. Number two, if you're able to bring them on the journey and help them be part of the process of building it so that they fully understand it to the point where the CEO can champion to the rest of the executive leadership team the comms' analytics strategy and their reporting, then you can start to drive adoption and people can start to see the value proposition a lot better.
Yeah, I think the skills gap is a really big issue, and we're still trying to get across the data literacy issue. We're still trying to get comms people to be more comfortable with data, to understand how to tell narratives and stories with it, to understand how to frame it in terms of why it matters for the business, how it's proving business objectives and outcomes. And when you add AI into that mix as well, I feel like that's another skill set on top. So we haven't even got the kind of slightly more basic one right, and then we want to potentially add another one on top. But I think it is just a bit expecting a little bit too much. What we're increasingly finding is that we're being asked to actually provide consultation in and of itself. So obviously CARMA is a media intelligence company. You know, our primary bread and butter is providing data, it's providing insights and analytics reports and so on, but we're increasingly getting asked to come in and just provide consultation to our clients. So that means we're coming in and we're building a framework with them, we're helping them to navigate, regardless of who's doing their measurement, helping them figure out what they actually should be measuring. And we're also doing a lot around training and coaching, so actually going in and delivering training programs so that people have got the capacity to actually understand what is measurement. You know, it's, as Jim McNamara talked about yesterday, MEL, that L part is so important, and it's often the bit that gets lost. And what I really loved about what he said yesterday was that it's not just learning from the data, it's also learning about measurement. So it's making sure that, you know, you're keeping that skills capacity up to speed, and that, you know, you do have someone who can come in and give you that advice and guidance on, here are new ways of doing it, here's how you can approach things differently, here's how you can solve your challenges in an ever-evolving world.
And I'll come back to the education point in a bit. I just wanted to quote one of the numbers from the Hotwire and Macrack survey, which said 83% of users consume flat data, spreadsheets, as opposed to more kind of explorative data sets or dashboards. What are your comments on that?
Yeah, I think this goes back to the data literacy and to the, to what extent do people understand that and how are they actually interpreting that data? I think there's a few issues with it. There is the interpretation, the how you're actually telling a story with it, what you're interpreting that data to mean, which, if you don't have the skill set, which very often comms people don't have, and they don't have the time more than anything to be able to do that. So that's where you need consultants to help. But then it's also knowing what data sets you should be looking at. So if you're just looking at one spreadsheet, chances are it is just one data set, and it's going to tell you a very limited story. So you need to have something that's more integrated, but then knowing what those points are, those different data sets, knowing how to integrate them, where you can get them. Again, that's often something where our clients tend to feel very overwhelmed and just don't know where to start. So that's where they need that advice and guidance.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me a whole lot, and it aligns 100% with what we've heard. Another stat that is particularly interesting to us is that, and it links back to what you just shared with us, is we find, and this was somebody else's research, and I'm probably going to quote the number wrong, but it's between 80 and 90% of time is spent cleaning and organizing data, and 10% is spent analyzing. And so we found that there's an automation process that's possible, but is an investment. But you can automate the organization, the collection of the data, and plug it eventually into a BI tool so that the time is spent analyzing the data in the BI tool rather than organizing a spreadsheet and maybe getting a couple of insights out of it. But that is definitely an investment that has to be made, but that's kind of flipping that narrative to being able to spend 80 to 90% of the time analyzing the data rather than cleaning and collecting it is kind of a good goal state to aim for.
So going back to education, I guess education is one of the missions that AMEC has in terms of how we approach the benefits of measurement and how we promote that in not only in the communication sector, but as you rightly said, is the wider business community and organizations out there. So what is, from your experience, the trend in terms of clients or the market being open to being educated? Do you get people calling you and saying, look, can you help me out with this? Where can I learn more about it?
I'm seeing a real increase in that because we're seeing an increase in planning and insight departments living within organizations, especially large ones. So they typically have this tech stack, they've got all of this different data that comes from within and without their organization, but they often don't have the capacity or just the time and the space to be able to upskill themselves all of the time, let alone the rest of their team. So I've got a client at the moment who is engaged with AMEC, is involved with various of the different groups, and is part of a planning and insight team, but they've asked us to come in and help deliver a very in-depth training and coaching program to 100 people because they need that additional support and they need that kind of third-party credibility. And I think that's what so much of it comes down to. It's those relationships. And it's that expertise and experience you can bring in when you can walk into a room and say, I've seen this before. People often think that their problem is unique to them. They often say, God, we're so disorganized. We don't know what our audience journey is. We don't know what our objectives are. We have such a problem being able to convince the rest of the organization of this. Do you see this? And we're like, yeah, literally all the time. And that gives them such reassurance when we can give them those examples of, yeah, we've seen this before and this is how they solved it. And that's what SAAS can't do. It's what AI can't really do. That kind of education bit is as much about trust and hand-holding, I think, as it is about anything else. It's not just empowering them with the knowledge. It's kind of making them feel like, okay, this is doable, this is achievable. And that's not something you can do by just flat materials or, plugging something into a chatbot. It requires that human relationship in my experience.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. I think the capacity point that you made, Orla, is spot on, and it generally is. It's not an openness to data or openness to learning new skills. It's a time and capacity issue. As I mentioned earlier, comms is being asked to do more with less. And it highlights the importance of being able to prioritize, and that's one of the things I didn't mention in terms of benefits of setting up Comtech to give the right analytics. Another stat, you've got me on the stats train now. Another stat is, I think it's that 80% of data goes unused completely. So having that filter and knowing what's relevant is an area where consultants can help. And then once you are able to prioritize what's important and what's not, the comms team can actually have the basis to say no to doing certain things, to requests that come in from elsewhere in the business. And that power to say no, but we could do this instead, knowing that it works, can help in terms of creating that capacity and that space to be able to learn a little bit. But without that, it's quite a challenge, and it's also a process. And you know, getting people to a point from a data literacy perspective, as Orla was just talking about, with getting them familiar with the data at first. It's a familiarization process to where the ideal goal state would be that there would be some kind of a handoff, and a lot of it would be handled in-house. But the reality right now is not that. But the openness and the desire to get there is a really, really positive place for the function to be.
It can be a steep learning curve, right, for some teams. And now to that we add AI and trying to wrestle with all the tools and how do we use it, how we don't use them. Talk about what you see in terms of AI and comms. What are the challenges? What are the possibilities?
Yeah, so I've been having this conversation with quite a few people here over the past kind of 24 hours or so. We had an AI roundtable yesterday at lunch, and as I've been explaining to people what my session was going to be about today, the conversation has come up a lot. And there's so much that AI, tech, SaaS, automation, if we kind of put that into one giant bucket, can do. It can do a lot of the heavy lifting. It can do a lot of the very quick top-line turnaround types of analysis. It can do a fair amount of evaluation, which is actually pretty decent, but it can't make decisions. It's that learning part. It's the what's next that it can't necessarily do. And when you think of, especially depends what kind of tool you're using. If you're using a public one, you're not going to want to put your entire organizational and comm strategy into it and tell me, okay, so with this in mind, what do I do? So, you know, it's not going to have that nuance. It's not going to have that context. And there's just a lot of cultural awareness as well. So this is something that was kind of touched on in one of the previous panels in the other room, the M&A one, about cultural sensitivities in different parts of the world. I had a request recently from a client to produce a piece of work for them to help them understand a little bit more about what was going on in a specific market. And we took all of the data, we did the research. I kind of was like, I've still got a few questions after this. Asked ChatGPT, okay, in this specific country, which is a country in Asia that I know next to nothing about, are there any cultural connotations? Is there anything I should be kind of aware of? And I asked it a whole bunch of questions, and it kept giving me just super generic answers. I asked one very quick question of our team in that country, gave me amazing insights that made it into the report that the client said was the thing that made it stand out. And there's just, I feel like sometimes AI will give you somewhat vague, generic answers to things. So it's really great for when you need something really quick so that you don't have to spend loads of time cleaning, loads of time analyzing. But when it comes to that kind of the context, the business decisions that we're going to make as a result of it, I just don't think that it's there yet.
Yeah, the nuance and the cultural anecdote you told was really powerful. I think my perspective, I'm in alignment with everything you just said. But my perspective on AI and its potential, it has huge potential, but it is potential, and it takes human power to actualize that potential. And at the end of the day, if there's one skill I would say would be recommended to master, is managing AI, because it's going to require human management for the foreseeable future, if not in perpetuity. So if you know the right questions to ask, and you know how to get what you need from it, but you know its limitations, and you treat it like an employee or a team of employees, and you know their limitations, you know their strengths, you know how to get the best out of it, then it has enormous potential to be a great help to a comms team, like I said, that's being asked to do more with less. You have a resource that in a lot of cases is free, and in others is a fairly small expense, a lot less than a human. If you know how to manage it, then that will kind of help you and help conquer the fear of AI is going to take my job, rather than AI can help me to be better at my job, which is where we're trying to shift that mindset with, I would say, from my experience, it's been a minority of comms professionals, but the fear is still definitely there, and it doesn't necessarily need to be. The power is still very much in our hands to make something of it.
Yeah, very true. Just before we open the floor for questions, if you have one prediction in the area of SaaS and AI and comms for the next 12 months, what would that be? And where do you want to see the industry going in 12 months?
Oh, that's a really good one. I kind of keep straddling this kind of line between being optimistic and pessimistic. In some ways, I'm pessimistic about how much and how quickly AI is going to do stuff for us. I think that the technology itself has a lot of potential. Whether that actually gets utilized and turned into tools that are widely available so that everyone's got access to that incredible potential is another thing. But that kind of, on the flip side, makes me optimistic for my role as a consultant, that I will still be needed. You know, and I feel like ultimately I'm optimistic that consultancy will still be needed, because I think people want relationships with people. Yes, they might want to buy some tech, but they ultimately want to work with people. They want someone who can hold their hand. They want someone they can shout at if they've got it wrong. And, you know, I'm sure a lot of us have had arguments with AI bots, and it gets quite frustrating when they throw a hissy fit. They want someone that they can bring along to present to their board, ultimately. So that we have to really make sure that we're positioning ourselves in that really, really strong light, that we're using all of the tools, AI included, to our benefit. But it's all about the narrative, the why it matters, the bringing that kind of focus back to why this is important to your business. And I think that that is always something, at least in the short to medium term, that people will trust with a human rather than with AI or tech.
And insights is a word that comes up a lot at these events.
Yeah, for sure.
My quick prediction on the optimistic side is that we'll find a way to integrate AI into various different workflows, whether it's content planning, media relations, content creation, project management. I think I probably mentioned that already. And so that the comms folks are able to focus on the things that humans exclusively can do. That's my optimistic prediction. Would you actually mind? I wanted to plug a research study we were doing. Would that be okay if
Absolutely,
I did that quickly?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, all right. So I'm very sorry to do this. This is a shameless plug. But so Point 600 has been leading a research study, and we basically have interviewed comms executives and done a lot of secondary research to try and find out what comms analytics maturity looks like. And we've developed a model for analytics maturity. And the second stage of answering the question of what activities are the most important is understanding which activities most impact the perceived impact of comms. So we have a survey that we're fielding, and it's an open survey, and you'd get the results of other organizations as well to understand where your maturity is and how it compares to others. So if it's of interest to you, the sign up is there. It's free. I'm not trying to sell you anything. So if you're interested, then please feel free to sign up or ask me about it afterwards. Thank you very much for listening, and I will move this off the screen so you don't have to look at it. I'll give you 10 seconds. Thank you.
Brilliant. There's a question over there. You can grab the mic. Richard, yeah.
Has a measurement maturity mapper. So if you're going to do Ed Survey, do please go and take a look at the measurement maturity mapper, which won't just ask you a load of questions, it then provides you a load of answers and ideas of things that you can do to improve your measurement. We've used it to great success working with our clients, where you use it as part of a consulting session with them. And then you look at the results, and it benchmarks you against the industry as you do it as well. So perhaps something Amek and you guys can
collaborate on. It seems like something we could potentially collaborate on. Thank you for the plug.
Any more questions from the audience? John Crow is not in the audience, so I can't point at him. I think we are all done. Brilliant. think we're good, yeah?
Yep.
Thank you
Yeah.
so
Thank
much,
you.
guys.
Thank you very much.